Now, Christopher Columbus would go from one place to the other. He thought Cuba was Japan. He was sent to the East Indies. He ended up in the West Indies. He told his sailors to sign the fact that he was in the West Indies. And if he didn't sign, he wanted to cut their tongue out. Van Sedem had done some pretty good chapter on this, and they came before Columbus. Now, when we look at this man and what he has set in motion, he set in motion the increase in the African slave trade. The British had not entered the slave trade at first because the British had some difficulty with the Catholic Church. But once the British decided to establish a church of their own, and if you're British extraction, belong to the Church of England, you have to live with the fact that here's a church whose foundation was the hot sexual passions of Henry VIII. Anybody want to prove otherwise? I hear them. Henry VIII wanted to cut off one wife's head, wanted to marry another, and all these wives. He wanted justification. He wanted a church that would back him up in all his skullduggery, including his thievery, including his raid on the church treasurer. So he created the kind of church that would give him what he wanted. That was the Church of England. Throughout his career, he defended the church as so sacred. Sacred to him because it let him do what he wanted to do. Now, the queen whose head he cut off was the only one that gave him a child. That child was Elizabeth I. Someone told her, the alleged Virgin Queen of England. We won't discuss that any further. Now, they showed her a ledger of how much money could be made in the slave trade after she had refused to go into the business. And finally she went into the business. One of the ships was her personal property, the good ship Jesus, headed by Captain Hawkins. Britain came into the slave trade and made it a business. A dirty business, but a business. Like well-organized gangsters with territory. The British sailed up the Gambia River, took 10 miles on the east side. That's the little facsimile nation called the Gambia right now. Never a nation. They would spread their slaveholding further west. They would push the Portuguese out of West Africa. They would push the Spaniards out. They would have a command position. The French would come into West Africa. After the rationale for the entry was found for them, an old holy devil called Cardinal Richelieu. But read your Catholic literature. Now, if you want to find some literature, some religious literature defending slavery, I don't know where you're going to go. Inasmuch as the defense of slavery on the part of the Muslim is vicious and tragic. And on the part of the Christians, it's even more so. Now, where you going to search for a pure religion? You ain't going to find none, so let's end that conversation. Organized religion has always endorsed the enslavement of people. Now, what about the world Christopher Columbus set in motion? He set in motion Western racism. He set in motion the colonization, not only of history, but the information about history. All of the fight over curriculum was set in motion because Christopher Columbus and people set in motion a concept of divine white right, a manifest destiny. The assumption that the people of Europe had rights over other people. It set in motion another bogus concept of a chosen people by God. If God chooses one people over another people, then God is a bigot. You cannot say this and say God is also love, God is kind, God is no respect of kith and kin, and say God chose me to do something. Then while people are choosing, inasmuch as all chosen people chose themselves, why in the hell don't you choose yourself to be free? Why won't you make a choice and say that we are too proud to live in slums? Why don't you understand what went wrong with the world Christopher Columbus did not discover? Why can't we understand how other people rose from the bottom and recovered what belonged to them? I have no great feelings for the Japanese, but I have some admiration about how they recovered from defeat, because they never let their mind forget who did it and how. And they knew, without shouting, without holding a single mass meeting, that if you're going to throw 2 atomic bombs and you're at war with 2 different people, why throw 2 on me instead of 1 on one side and 1 on the other side? They threw 2 on you because you were not white. And they imprisoned your people because you were not white. So now, they refuse to let their enemy take away from them their self-confidence and their idea of God as they conceived him to be. And if you can hold on to that, you can recover from almost anything. Now let's end by saying what we could have done to recover from the disaster of the world Christopher Columbus did not discover. Doing the concept of a Caribbean Federation, the first thing we could have done or should have done was to unify all of those islands and have a common defense force. Therefore, there would have been no Grenada, there would have been no Panama invasion, there would have been a common currency, a common defense force, an economic union. What one can't produce, the other one could produce. A common tax structure. Put them all together, then what have you got geographically? Look at all the territory you've got. Once you put them together into a common unity and a common parliament. Now you have a local parliament. Now, let me show you what I'm talking about now. Every state in the United States has its own House of Representatives and local representation. And yet every state in the United States has representation in Washington. So this does, having a common parliament for all of the Caribbean islands does not keep them from having local things specifically to take care of local situations. But a common parliament to take care of island-wide situations. We have not dealt with a contradiction. The concept of Pan-Africanism was created by 3 Trinidadians: George Padmore, C.L.R. James, H. Sylvester Williams. Why is it that they never could unify Trinidad or Single Island? Why is it that of the 3, not a single one of them ever found a long-lasting unity with a black woman? This is delicate talk now. You talk naturally and you expect it to live it. Live some of it. Why is it that no one sat down and figured out a judicial system